Record on the. Let me get a handout. Gotta find my. Hand. Here we go. Okay, look, I wanted to take a little sidestep here, because the stuff that we've been doing in Revelation is, it's pretty difficult, and so much comes from other books of the Bible. And anyway, so we had finished with the fifth and sixth seals. We had finished what I consider the end of the age. We came to the end. It even said, the wrath of Jesus has, fallen upon them or whatever. And then as we move on, now we're going to go, it's going to be a retelling of the same events, just told differently when we get into from the seven seals to the seven trumpets. But I thought take a break in between to go through this, what I want to talk about on how to read the Bible. And I think I misnamed it because it's not really how to read, the Bible. It's about how to read the Bible enough to pick up on what the Bible story is all about. And I don't think we read, and I'm not saying the we here in this room, although it includes the we here in this room. I think probably American Christians, don't read the Bible enough to put the story of the Bible together. And we end up with segmented parts, almost like they're standalone stories that get put together in one book. And I was working on something, so I got to wondering about this, because in the book of Revelation, just things that you start you thinking, then you go off in a different direction. In Romans, book of Romans by Paul, 25-30% of Romans is quotes from the Old Testament. Just Paul's just quoting. In Revelation, I don't think there's a single quote from the Apostle John. He has all of these pictures. He has all of these allusions, references, echoes out of the Old Testament where he talks about stuff. And I kind of know what he's talking about because there's something in the Old Testament, but he's not quoting like Paul does. And part of this is because, Paul was a scholar, went to the best schools, he went to Concordia Seminary. It's like that, but he's got that education and he studied under these, great teachers. And so his whole life was wrapped up in Bible study. John, being a fisherman, although he's literate, his knowledge really comes out of the synagogue, the preaching and teaching of the rabbis, But see, a lot of us, we do that. Our teaching comes from just kind of hanging around church and listening to pastor sermons or classes and stuff like that without digging in like Paul would have. So anyway, so here's the problem. This problem with me as the teacher is I start wondering about things. You guys are all going to discuss it now. Okay. So the question I have in there is, how many have been taught how to read the Bible? Pastor probably has. All the pastors. I mean, you take a class in Shakespeare, you learn how to read Shakespeare, But how many have been taught how to read, how to read the Bible? Usually when you become a Christian, or your faith gets reawakened, you're told two things: read your Bible every day and pray. You got in there, something like the Acts prayer, which is adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication. And then if you move on, hey, here's a portals of prayer. Use this to kind of supplement, to supplement your, your reading. But the thing is, are you ever given a technique on how to read the Bible? Hey, Troy, how you doing? I see Troy's there. Now we're complete.
Good to see you guys. Good morning.
Anyway, so, I don't mean to take away from people's personal quiet time. I mean, all that stuff is, it's okay. And I don't want to substitute a seminary education for what we as mostly laymen, do. Okay. But it's in reading the Bible, but it's in reading the Bible often enough and thoroughly enough that we pick up these stories. Ray, do your microphone.
Pastor Cave conducted a class in hermeneutics.
Hermeneutics?
Yeah, how to interpret the Bible.
Mhm.
Well, that doesn't really give you an indication as to how to read the Bible. And, I took a real quick look through what was available as far as how to read the Bible. And so the first thing you gotta do is pick the right Bible.
A Christian Bible would help.
Just read Bible.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Hermeneutics, for those who you don't know, is the study of Herman. No,
Yes.
it's a, it's kind of a science art kind of thing on how to understand, the Bible. And again, that's putting pieces together also. So anyway, and Bibles with study notes, I mean, they're good, but what they do is they keep us from practicing how to read the Bible. Because what do you do when you're reading the Bible and you got a study Bible and see, like Jim there has just a Bible with no notes, may have some textual notes, in there that explain how some of the words were derived. But most of the time we have study Bible like Ray's. And what we do is we read and then we look to the bottom of the page. Yeah, you look to the bottom of the page to find out what someone else is going to tell you that passage means to him. And so what we do is we end up by getting lazy, like that. And I'm not saying I use Bible study, study Bibles and stuff like that. I'm just saying, as far as trying to read, Pastor Roger.
I usually conduct 2 Bible studies a week at Messiah. And I know that people look at those footnotes at the bottom. And I insist that they don't necessarily mean what the scripture says. They're the interpretation of the author.
Right.
And I need people to understand that. And so that's why I insist, we don't rely on it.
They're like a Bible commentary built into, but like I say, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with study Bibles. And I'm not saying that any study Bible you pick up may be wrong on a particular issue and stuff like that. What I'm saying is it doesn't make, because if I can just read really quick, I don't have to reference something else, to do it. And we'll see that when we get into, I told everybody, mark your Bibles in 1 Samuel 17, because that's where we're going to. I heard the voice over here.
Oh, come on. I've always been under the impression that scripture interprets itself.
Right.
This is what I learned as I was studying for ministry. And scripture interprets itself. We don't have to sit down and say, well, what does this mean? It always tells you what it means. You may have to read it over several times, but
yeah,
that's how it works.
But if there's something, this all started, like a couple of weeks ago, when we got into when I was trying to explain this generation, when we were, connecting the 6th seal with Matthew 24, the Olivet Discourse. But where else did the Bible talk about this generation? And did it mean, like a lot of people think, that this generation will be the generation that sees all these things happen 2,000 years down the road when Jesus returns? Or does it mean this generation today. Yeah, if I said this generation, I mean us and our kids. Or when we talked about, the sun going dark and the moon doing whatever it did, turning to blood, and, stars falling from the sky. Is that just a standalone phrase, or is it talked about somewhere else, which I think we went through 5, 6, Old Testament passages where every time the exact same descriptions were used when God was making judgment on a nation, whether it be Edom or, whoever it might be. He used that same description, and it didn't mean the end of the universe. To them, it meant like the end of the world, to those who are receiving the judgment. So anyway, so Jesus had said, in Luke, and we've done this before, and beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them all the scriptures, the things that were concerning himself, which he's meaning that if you want to know about Jesus, you got to read that Old Testament, so that when Jesus does something, you go, wait, I can connect that. It's not like Jesus is working separate from the Old Testament, because a lot of people also think that, well, Jesus is here, we have a new sheriff in town, and things are going to be done his way instead of God the Father's way in the Old Testament. And that's not true. Were you going to say something, Rick?
No.
Oh, you look like it. Oh, okay. Now you can hear now, right? Didn't they fix the other ear? Oh, okay. Okay, I'll try to talk to your good ear. So, so the story of David and Goliath, that's what 1 Samuel 17 is, okay? What's happening in David and Goliath? I'm sorry? I couldn't hear. Oh, do your microphone.
The big guy with his armies and the little guy with his armies.
Okay, so it's a big guy with his army and little guy with his army. What else? Come on. I mean, this is probably one of the most famous stories in the Bible. Larry picked up his microphone, so I'm going to assume that he wants to say it.
His faith, David's faith. That's the only thing that's important in that whole thing.
Okay, David's faith.
He knew what he could do with God's help.
Okay, that's it. What else?
The rest of the people were chicken.
Don't mess with a kid with a slingshot.
So let's see. Let's read it. Let's see, I got it here. Let me go down a way. You guys know the story. David's out in the fields. Saul has his armies. They come against the Philistines. Philistines are bad guys, right? Philistines are bad guys, and it's going to be a battle. Who's going? And their guy is Goliath. And who's going to fight for Goliath? And then David shows up on the scene, and when he hears Goliath, let me find where it'll start there. It says in verse 19 of chapter 17, 1 Samuel. Now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. And David rose early in the morning and left the sheep with a keeper and took the provisions and went as Jesse had commanded him. So he's going to go take lunch to the people there. And he came to the encampment as the host was going out to the battle line, shouting the war cry. And Israel and the Philistines drew up for battle, army against army. And David left the things in charge of the keeper of the baggage and ran to the ranks and went and greeted his brothers. And as he talked with them, behold, the champion of the Philistines, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, came up out of the ranks of the Philistines and spoke the same words as before. And David heard him. All of the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him and were much afraid. I mean, just figure Shaquille O'Neal coming at you, but bigger, you know? The men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And the king will enrich the man who kills him with great riches and will give him his daughter and make his father's house freed in Israel. And David said to the men who stood by him, what shall be done for the man who kills the Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For whom is the uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him in the same way. So shall it be done to the man who kills him. So, so you got an offer there. Hey, there's a bounty on Goliath and the Philistines, and here's what your rewards. So Eliab, his eldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, why have you come down? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your presumption and the evil of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? What was it not but a word? And he turned away from him towards another and spoke the same way. And the people answered. I think this is a funny part. I mean, I think God's got a great way of writing this stuff. Here the Philistines are about ready to just crush Israel. And Eliab's, David's brother, probably because he hates David, or jealous of him, says, hey, aren't you supposed to be watching the sheep? I mean, there's not going to be any reason for sheep if they get defeated. Verse 31, and when the words that David spoke were heard, they repeated them before Saul, and he sent for him. And David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine. Anyway, so it goes on. So you get to the story, and let's see, and Saul puts David in his armor, which is too big, and David says, I can't wear this. I can't do any of this stuff. Then David said to Saul, I cannot go with these, for I've not tested them. So David put it off. Then he took his staff in his hand and chose 5 smooth stones. Remember that, because that's from the brook, and put them in his shepherd's pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he approached the Philistine. And the Philistine moved forward and came near to David with his shield bearer in front of him. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, ruddy and handsome in appearance. And the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by the gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. And then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword and with a spear and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you down and cut off your head. And I will give the dead bodies of the host of the Philistines this day to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all earth may know there is a God in Israel, and that all this assembly may know that the Lord saves not with sword and spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into his hands. When the Philistine arose and came and drew near, when the Philistine drew near to meet David, David ran quickly towards the battle line to meet the Philistine, and David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, and slung it, and struck the Philistine on his forehead. The stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face on the ground. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. There was no sword in the hand of David. Then David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of his sheath and killed him and cut off his head with it. When the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled, and the men of Israel and Judah rose with a shout and pursued the Philistines as far as Gath. Anyway, they go back and they kill the Philistines. Okay, so that's the story. Now, what we hear in all of these is you get like a moral story out of David, you know? The moral story teaches how important, it's a lesson in bravery, courage, and faith, right? And that is in there. Roger.
I got a little problem here.
Okay.
It says in verse, 50. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and a stone and struck the Philistine and killed him. All right. Then in verse 51, David ran and stood over the Philistine, took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him. He killed him twice.
Yeah.
There's a problem with that.
Call your publisher.
I have a problem with that.
It probably just means that he ran him through to make sure he was dead. I mean, although cutting his head off would do the same, like that. So anyway, so you get that. Let's listen up because we got a lot to cover here. So you get you get these moral stories about the bravery, the faith. Like Larry said, the faith. If you have the faith of David, God will conquer your enemies. Have you ever heard that one? God will conquer the giants in your life and all those stories. And what about the 5 smooth stones? You heard the whole story there about the stones, okay? He took 5 out of a riverbed, smooth stones. They get smooth because of water running over them, put them in his pouch, and he took one out and did his sling and killed Goliath, okay? So he only used one of the 5. There's no mention in there of what happened to the other 4. But people write books, and they write, huh? Well, no, it could be backup, but people write books, and they say the 5 smooth stones David had in his pouch represent what David carried in his heart. Faith, trust, courage, obedience, and praise. It sounds good. It sounds good. I mean, you walk away from the story of David and Goliath, you feel good. Yeah. And the story does tell what Hudson said. It's a big army with a big guy and a little army with a little guy. What's that?
Looking for it.
Oh, Larry.
I think the smooth stones means that he practiced a lot and knew exactly what he was doing.
Well, no, I'm sure he did.
He didn't want stones that weren't round because he knew exactly what his trajectory.
Hey, when you picture him doing that sling, what do you picture what's happening? I watched a video. Now, whether this is what happened, but I watched this guy in the Middle East with a sling, and he took it. I mean, it's like he took it, he's spinning it around, and he spins himself like you're doing a discus thrower. And that thing just shot at the target. I mean, it must have been going like a bullet, and then just shattered the target that it went into, So, I mean, I don't know how close that was to what, he did. But anyway, so we read the story, there. And normally what you get are great lessons, okay? But here's the thing, is that David prefigures the coming of Christ, okay? Christ is going to come from the line of David, right? Okay? It is his seed line that is going to take us to Jesus. What you find him coming out against Goliath is if David dies, what happens? What if Israel gets defeated? I mean, obliterated. What happens? Come on, there should be an easy one.
Jesus.
Game over. Game over. The line of David is gone. The prophecy of God cannot come to fruition. There is no people of God. Israel's gone. And that's where the story is the preservation of the line of Jesus. This goes back to what Jesus said in Luke. Read Moses and the prophets and the writings, because they all talk about me. So when we read David and Goliath, if we come up with a story about us, we've done it wrong. That doesn't mean you can't use it. You know what I'm saying? But if we come up with a story about us, if I had the courage of David, I could defeat armies, or don't worry about again, like I said, the giants in your life, because God will take care of them. It's all true, but that's not the story. Okay? Anybody have a problem with that or disagree with that? Or
But David nearly,
do your microphone.
but David nearly destroyed his own self and his family with what he did with Bathsheba.
Right. No, he's a human being. It's not like it's not like he's like the son of Zeus or something like that. He has his own human frailties. But here you have that's happening. So look, so David goes up against Goliath. I think this is in your notes. What are some of the motifs in this? I mean, some of the important and usually repeating items in the theme of the Bible. I've got here Genesis 3:15, the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. And it talks about the heel of the serpent. Snaps or strikes the heel of the woman, but the heel of the woman comes down and crushes the head of the serpent. Isn't that the message of Genesis 3? That there will be one down the road, although Satan attacks and Satan tries to harm, who in the end will crush the head of the serpent. What did we see David do? Crush the head of the serpent. In the book of Judges, I got to find my in Judges 4. Anybody know the story of Sisera? Oh, yeah, I don't know this guy. He had a great ending. Sisera is a Canaanite warrior. He commanded armies for Jabin and other Canaanite kings, which ruled over Israel harshly. You got to remember in the book of Judges, remember the famous line, and the people did what they thought was good in their own eyes. And then they all went to pot. They got taken over by other nations like that. And they would be, treated terribly for 20 years or so. And then God would raise up a judge, a leader that would take them and, win their freedom back. And then after a period of time, the next thing would say, and then they did what they thought was right. It goes on like this, probably 6, 7 times, like that. So they're under this rule of this guy. And this is where the story of Deborah and Barack Obama, no, it says Barack. Anyway, come and they're going to rise up as the judges and they're going to fight against, his armies. And, so he goes on the run, okay? And it says in verse 17 of Judges 4, it says, but Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael. Remember, these people are trying to destroy Israel in the book of Judges. To the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber, the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin, the king of Hazor, and the house of Heber, the Kenite. You guys all remember that, right? Okay. And Jael, so this is the wife, the Jael came out to meet Sisera, the bad guy, and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, do not be afraid. So he turned aside to her in the tent, and she covered him with a rug. And he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. And he said to her, stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks, is anyone here? You say no. But Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. So he died. Okay? So again, the way that God has saved Israel is by crushing the head of the enemy. Okay? Judges 9. I'm sorry. Yes, sir. Did you find the second death of Sisera?
No, not yet. I'd like to just touch on some of the context in the head of this story.
Hmm.
It said that Sisera had 900 chariots of iron, and Barak had 10,000 men. That would promote a retreat. Would it not?
Right. Well, that's what he was doing.
Sisera
Yeah,
ran away.
right. But you got to remember the story of Deborah and Barak is that nobody would fight against the enemy. And none of the men, they were all cowards. And Deborah, a woman, because everybody says, look how great Deborah is. And she did a great thing. But she was only in that position because the men were such cowards. And so she's ready to fight. She has to go out and recruit. Finally, she gets Barak, probably because they need a man's covering or something to do it. But she gets Barak to do it. So anyway, crushed the head. In the story, Judges 9, starting in verse 22, you have the story of Abimelech. Now, Abimelech's another one of these bad guys, okay? I'm just going to tell you what this one says. So he goes through and they're fighting him and all that. And then he gets to a point where where they're surrounding the enemy castle or whatever it is, like that. I mean, he's winning. He's winning this war. And a woman, I forget her name. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't have time for it. Anyway, a woman comes out and she pushes the big cornerstone off the top of the thing and it crushes Abimelech's head. And he dies. Okay. So anyway, so we have this theme that kind of runs through, kind of runs through here. So let's, let me just got a little more here. So let's look deeper into the story. You don't have this in your notes. David goes up against Goliath and he takes that early motif about crushing the head of his opposition. The attempt of Goliath was to end the seed of the line of Jesus. Did David understand this? Probably not. Did Goliath understand it? Probably not. These are these backstories that are working. Now, God knew it, right? We assume that. Satan probably knew it. Satan's working in Goliath's corner. Now notice, David didn't go after his hands, didn't go after his feet to take his trophies, went after his head, cut off the head of the leader, killing Goliath a second time. I mean, anyway, but so he goes after the head. He takes the stone, whacks him in the head, and then he cuts off the head. And again, that's that Genesis 3, motif that's happening there. Roger.
I just want to mention that Jim squared me away on that second death thing.
Oh,
Because his Bible says after he had killed him.
see, again, there's translation thing. I mean, yeah. So that's good. Thank you, Jim. All of you. If we stay reading the scripture, we find the answers to things that puzzle us. So anyway, so the story isn't there to teach some moral lesson. It's there to move us closer to the promises that are fulfilled in the New Testament. Where was Jesus crucified? What was it? Anybody say Golgotha? I just couldn't hear. Okay, no, Rick said. It was crucified on Golgotha. What does Golgotha mean?
Place of the
The place
skull.
of the
It's
skull.
the skull. You know, so I mean, this stuff, again, it's Satan. The instrument that he believed was going to be used to defeat Jesus literally comes down on his own head. I mean, that's what the crucifixion is the death that finally defeats Satan. So Paul takes it a step further, and this is the end. Is in Romans 16 when he's doing all his greetings to people. One of the lines he says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. Think about that. I mean, so as we go through our life, is our hope is that we will be the ones defeating Satan. Jesus already defeated Satan. We'll be defeating Satan. I mean, it's a whole thing that works around that. So what it's all telling us is that how the Bible was fulfilled, that promise of Jesus coming. Like that, what you gonna say, Ray?
Well, isn't the whole thing that Satan couldn't defeat the head of the family, so I must go after the family, the body.
Wait. So that because he can't defeat the head?
Jesus defeated Satan. And Satan now says, well, I can't defeat Jesus, then I must defeat
Well,
the family.
that goes back to Revelation 12. We'll get into that in Revelation 12 is a scene with the woman with the 12 stars on her head, who is Israel, who's going to give birth to Jesus. And Satan is chasing the woman all over, all over. But then God snatches her out, the baby out, up into heaven. And so Satan, the dragon, the red dragon, we'll see this when we get to Revelation 12, is to do damage to the family, like that. But he can't touch Christ, So again, this is the thing. I mean, you read all of this and how it kind of works, works together. I got a thing I might bring up next week. I guess what time it is. Yeah, we're out of time. Next week is a connection between John chapter 2 at the wedding at Cana, John chapter 3, Nicodemus story and being born again from water from above, water into wine, water from above, to chapter 4, the woman at the well, talking about the water in the well, but then that turns back into a marriage thing that goes back to Cana. It's like John's telling this story like it's all just one story, where we like to think of the wedding at Cana, the meeting at night with Nick at Night, and no way, and then the woman at the well. Like there are 4 different stories. Like Jesus is walking from one scene to the next scene. Hey, next week's episode will be Jesus meeting the woman at the well, and John's writing these things like they're all together, and they all have Old Testament shadows, before them. So was that useful at all? Out of my wonderings, I'm wondering what's happening. Okay, anybody online? Troy, what's up with your men's conference? When was that?
2 weeks from tonight, everyone will come in. We're up to about 130, 140 churches nationwide. A lot of people will be hitting our link from around the world. We've got great lineup of speakers and lots of things going on. So it's an exciting time.
Good. Hey, tell them that story about David and Goliath. Anyway, no, Troy's got this huge men's conference worldwide, and what'd you say, 120 churches are signed up so far?
130 right now.
130, yeah, no, amazing the work he does. Very good. Okay, where are we at? What are we doing? Who am I? let me turn off the recording. Is there?